Oh, the first time I saw the FD Crockett was in 2002. I was near the end of working on my book, Chesapeake Bay Boats, working on one of the chapters on log hull deck boats. A group of us from Urbana, consisting of Bill Height, Ray Rogers, John England, the late Jonesy Payne, and myself, drove down to Ron Turner's home, and we went to his home in Pocosin where the boat was moored. John, who would go on to oversee the restoration of the boat here at the museum, saw the FD Crockett for the first time. Ray Rogers took measurements off of her to do some of his amazing drawings of the boat. I took photos for the book and interviewed Ron. Going in, I knew right much about log boats, what my grandfather called canoes. My grandfather was born in 1898, and when he turned 11 years old, he went to work full-time as a colored boy on his father's 5-log canoe. Granddaddy, as I called him, spent his life as a Rappahannock River washerman. I learned a great deal about the heritage and culture of Chesapeake Bay log boats from being around him. Also, growing up in the 1950s in Urbana, on the creek, there were numerous small 3- and 5-log canoes around. Some along the shoreline in various stages of life, with some fairly well kept, tied to the pilings on the wooden bridge going across Urbana Creek. As I think back, I learned a lot about log boats from the marshy guts on the creek that had turned into boat graveyards. There were numerous sites where canoes had been pulled up in the marsh, left to die. When boats are afloat and decked over, you cannot always see their bones. But in the marsh, the elements of time and wind and tide clearly reveal the skeletons of the boats. In my Deltaville-built skiff, I ran up on many a big jimmy crab, running for safety beneath the bilge log of a dying log canoe. I learned early on how to tell the age of the boats. If locust wooden trunnels poked out from the sides, it was an old canoe. Then if it had rusted metal rods coming out of the sides, it was a fairly new canoe. When I walked up on the FD Crockett at Ron's dock, the basic hull of the boat was similar to those ancient hulls that I'd seen in the marshes on Urbana Creek. But I could tell the FD Crockett was something very special. For one thing, she was a lot bigger. And she had, Lord, the prettiest stern that I'd ever seen on a workboat. Prettiest one fantail stern I'd ever seen. The FD Crockett and the amazing vessel Old Point that is owned and maintained by the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum in St. Michael's, Maryland, are the last 2 log deck boats from their era still alive. They represent a narrow window of boat building history on Chesapeake Bay, when for a short while large log deck boats were built in the era of internal combustion engines. These 2 boats were built to accommodate engines, not sails. They were built at a time of a growing boat building shift from centuries of bay boat builders building sailboats out of logs, shifting to plank-built dead-rise wooden boats powered by gasoline engines. And in spite of the changing market, a few log canoe builders, primarily in Pocosin and York County area of Virginia, adapted to the times and continued to build commercial fishing boats out of logs modified for gas engines. The FD Crockett, built in 1924, is 100 years old. She is built in the heyday of Chesapeake Bay deck boats. During the 1920s, more wooden deck boats were built on the bay than any other time in history. The Chesapeake Bay maritime community owe an enormous amount of gratitude to the Deltaville Maritime Museum and to the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum for having the will and the foresight to maintain these boats for all of us. Books, and I've written right many of them, are great. Models are great. Photographs are great. Paintings are great. But there's no learning experience better than seeing and being on or beside the real thing. Happy birthday, FD Crockett. And let's hope you're around for another 100 years. John asked me to introduce the next speaker, and it's with great respect and pleasure that I introduce to you Alan Holston. Alan, you're here, aren't you?
Yeah.
Alan's from York County. He is the founder of the extremely popular Workboat Life Facebook page that he started in 2018. Alan worked the water as a commercial fisherman for 20 years and knows the ways of the watermen, and he knows the boats of the Chesapeake Bay. He worked alongside and on the FD Crockett. He knew Captain Purdy Green and William Bradshaw, names associated with the working life of the FD Crockett, and he has a story to tell you. Let's all welcome him. Alan?
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Glad to have this opportunity. And those of you that know me, I mean, I'm all about the history and keeping it alive and just supporting the watermen today and keeping the seafood industry in the forefront of everyone. And so that's why I started Workboat Life in 2018, was mainly to capture the history. Excuse me. But so here today, we're here to talk about the FD Crockett. And just so happens I know a little bit about the FD Crockett because she was a Seaford boat. And people know that I'm all about Seaford because that's where I grew up working on the water. My dad was a lifetime waterman, and he worked out of Back Creek at Mills Marina and Seaford. And Back Creek had 5 different crab houses through the years, 3 different railways, 3 different fish houses, and there was over 50 deck boats that worked out of there in the 30s and 40s. So it was like a mecca of the seafood industry. And FD Crockett was right in the midst of it all. So, FD Crockett, and one thing FD Crockett was a 9-log canoe built in 1924. And she was built by Alec Gaines. And a lot of people try to say Alexander and Alex, which is correct, but the family called him Alec, A-L-E-C. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is going to be from oral history. And we have confirmed these instances of the oral history, but I can't confirm exact years of when these transitions took place. But we've got the story pretty well put together, and so that's what we'll be sharing here today. And so Alec Gaines, the first thing that we have material-wise to reference any of this was Smith Marine Railway had a store that would sell, supplies and hardware and all for boats. And so Alec had gone there October of 1922, and he bought 514 pounds of 5/8 rod iron, 6-foot lengths. He bought 114 pounds of 1/2-inch rod iron. And then in November of 1922, he bought 8 pounds of nails and 4 pounds of spikes. And then January 25th of 1923, he bought a tree for a mast. And so we know that during that time, there were at least 9 logs plus that were cut and pulled out of Boulder Swamp, which is in Seaford. If you're familiar with Seaford, you have Seaford Road and Back Creek Road, and there's a woods that runs through the middle of Seaford, and there's a swamp in there they call Boulder Swamp. And that's where you would go to find your old growth, because all the higher level land had been cleared and overgrown and cleared so many times that the swamp areas is where you would find the oldest, biggest, best trees. And so they went into that swamp and they found the logs and cut them and pulled them out. Well, at that time, it was being built for Ferdinand Crockett. And Ferdinand lived at what is now known as Sparrow Road. Right at the end of the road, there's a little point right there with a nice two-story farmhouse there. And it's right across Chisholm's Creek from Smith Marine Railway. It's right where Goose Creek begins. And so it was built right there at Ferdinand's home. And so we do know, we've been trying to confirm, we know Alec did have a brother that did help him build the FD Crockett. But we weren't sure about his name. And some of these lists and things reference a Patrick. And so we think his name was Patrick, but we haven't been able to confirm that. But later on, after this build, Patrick had been involved in a sawmill incident where they used to have old sawmills they would bring to your property, and they could take the wheel off of a tractor or a Model T or anything, and with a belt drive, run that sawmill to cut lumber. And so his brother ended up dying from a sawmill accident after the FD Crockett was built, but he helped Alec build the boat. So it was built for Ferdinand Desota Crockett, and he was from Seaford. You know, a lot of times Picosa put some claims out there, but he was strictly from Seaford, and FD Crockett was a Seaford boat. And we're very proud of that. Yeah, and it was formerly known as Crab Neck, but it was like 1910 when it became Seaford. But you had Goodwin Neck, Crab Neck, and there was Fish Neck. So, but David and I still have Crab Neck on our boats, on our dead rises. So, but it was built for Ferdinand, and he was an entrepreneur, you know, and he was building it for freight. And Larry, I appreciate you sharing a lot about the log canoes, their beginning, and you know, the origin and all, but one thing we got to stress here, which some of y'all already know, is they were the trucking industry of the time. You know, everything in those days was around the water. The waterways were your highways. Even your transportation to go from different areas would be on the water, because you didn't have roads. You had some cow paths, you know, so the roads weren't even established yet. And so Ferdinand, he had it built to haul freight, and they would haul all kinds of things. You know, FD Crockett hauled pigs to Smithfield. They were canning tomatoes in, and they would ship tomatoes to Baltimore, or hauling lumber, or watermelons. They would go down the Intercoastal Waterway to like Edenton in Carolina and load up with watermelons. And on their way back up the waterway, they'd see kids over there swimming. They'd throw a couple watermelons off. The kids would swim out there and get them, you know, enjoy some watermelon. And while I'm talking about this, I want to mention that a lot of times when they would haul lumber, they would be loaded, you know, very heavy load, and it makes them settle down deep in the water. And a lot of the boats that hadn't been heavily loaded for a while, the sides would begin to dry open. And when they would be lower in the water, it would be seeping in, coming in the sides. They'd be down there chinking, trying to stop the water from coming in. And so they would take the sawdust from the sawmill and throw it in the water around the boat, and it would draw that in. And when it was pulling the water in, it would help them stop it, help chink it up. So, and I've told you that for a reason. But then, one thing I was going to tell you that with the hauling freight is we knew them, the seafood industry knew them as market boats. Now, buy boats is a real self-explanatory term that was used some But in this area, they were all market boats. Because for the seafood industry, it's all about the market. You know, even today, when there's an abundance of crabs and the market gets flooded, and then they'll say, well, no market tomorrow. You know, they'll tell them that today. And that means you can't work tomorrow. They're not going to be buying tomorrow because the market's flooded. So it was all about the market. It was market boats. And when they were oystering on James River, there were 50 to 75 market boats that would come up in there to buy the oysters. And some of them knew the boat so well that they could be out there hand tonguing, and somebody could look and say, well, you know, here comes Iva W, or you know, here comes whatever. And people would say, where? I don't see anything. And you could look, all you could see was some rigging coming over the horizon. And some of them knew them so well they could tell you which boat it was. And they would show up, and sure enough, that's who it was. But when they were shipping all the freight, this is a tag that you don't see anymore. And like if you were shucking oysters or whatever, your can of oysters would have this seal, this tag on it that was showing it was yours. And you were putting it on that market boat to be sent to the market and sold. And when you were on the other end buying, if it didn't have this tag, if it wasn't sealed, then you didn't want to buy it because it had been tampered with. So this is something you don't see anymore. And so I just want to show you all this. But I told you all about the sawdust and leaking and all that because the story is told, and we believe it to be very true, that the FD Crockett, you could load her up with 1,500 bushels of oysters. And they said that when you loaded her with 1,500 bushels of oysters, she wouldn't leak a teacup full of water. You know, she was so tight that it didn't matter how long she'd been up, you know, that when she went down, when she was loaded, she wouldn't leak a teacup full. And I can tell you that the time that I know of her, she was so well maintained. I mean, you could eat off the floor. I mean, she was clean and she was functional, very functional. All right, so Ferdinand, he had it for running freight. And like I said, they were the trucking industry. And then later on, when they started building roads and better highways, then trucks were being developed, and so they weren't so much used for moving freight. And that's when they were more or less buying oysters and moving seed or moving shell. But also we had the crab drudging industry. And that was a very large fishery for this whole area, the whole bay. And see, a lot of people will call it crab dredging, which is correct how it's spelled. But if you work on the water, it was crab drudging. So that's why we call it drudging. But the FD Crockett primarily was crab drudging after Ferdinand. And Marvin Lindsay, Captain Marvin Lindsay was from there. And you know what, I didn't talk about how the logs were put together and pinned in Seaford at Sparrow Road. Then she was flipped over and they took her across Chisholm Creek to Smith Marine Railway, and they put the decks on her and put the pilot house on her and finished her and floated her. So, but Captain Marvin Lindsay from there, he ended up buying her from Ferdinand. And we don't think Ferdinand had her all that such a long time. But we don't know the exact year, but Captain Marvin Lindsay did buy her and he started running her. And Captain Marvin Lindsay was married to Pretty Green's sister. So that was his brother-in-law. And so we know that Pretty, which, so you know, here we go with the names. When Pretty Green was born, he was such a pretty baby. And the dad was like, oh, he's such a pretty baby. He's so pretty. And so the family just started calling him Pretty. His name was William, but he was known as Pretty. But when you're working on the boats and the seafood industry and around the docks and the guys and all, hey, Pretty, it started becoming announced as Purdy. P-U-R-D-Y. So that's why you hear it both ways. So the family, he was pretty. but on the waterman and on the shore and all, he was pretty. So, you know, a lot of us will say pretty green because that's what we're used to saying. But anyway, he would work on the boat with Marvin. And then, well, before any of this, Marvin had been a veteran in World War I. And in one of the battles, he had received a shrapnel wound that was plaguing him for years. He battled with that wound for 20 years while he was running the boat, and Pretty would be on there with him. And then after 20 years, somewhere right around 1938 or 39 is what we're believing, is he went to Portsmouth Marine Hospital and had a surgery, and that surgery ended up leaving him an invalid. And he couldn't even get around. He was bedridden and didn't last much longer after that. And so at that point, that's when Purdy took over to FD Crockett and was running her herself. So we do have a oral story that came from Purdy himself. He talked about during the war that he would do some work for Ballard Oyster Company, which had a place in Norfolk, but they had it over in Eastern Shore. And I think he was turning some shell for them, you know, because he was primarily dredging crabs. But in the summertime, it would be crab potting. You didn't dredge crabs in the summer, so you would find other things to keep the boat busy. And he would turn shells and plant and do things for Ballard Oyster Company. And over on the Eastern Shore, there was an island where they had POWs. They had German POWs that were coming off the subs that were off the shore and everything. And so those POWs would go on deck and work on deck with Pretty. And he said that they enjoyed working with him and that they didn't want to go home. They didn't want to go back to Germany. They wanted to stay over here. And so they enjoyed being able to work on the boat with him. And they were all skilled. They were machinists and engineers and all. I mean, they had all kinds of training, and they could fix anything. So they got along great, you know. And so it worked out, perfect to have that workforce and all. And he enjoyed doing it. And so he said it worked out really well. But so then, you know, I was talking to Benny Hogg, which is from Pocosin, because he was a oysterman on James River for a long time. Because I knew how important crab dredgery was to FD Crockett, but I just wanted to confirm it. And Benny said that when there were 50 and 75 buy boats on the James River buying the oysters, that he does not remember the FD Crockett buying oysters at that time. So I know she was crab dredging at that time. So I just confirmed that through him. And while they were crab dredging, more modern era, the boat had a lathrop in it. And Pretty would never run them hard or anything. And so one day after she had been running for years, it blew up and he got towed in. And so the boat was sitting there, and they found a surplus 671 Detroit diesel put in her. And so the Georgia E, which was a Lawson boat, which was in Hampton Creek, hooked on to FD Crockett and towed her to Smith's Marine Railway so they could swap the engines out. And when they got there, Pretty told them he didn't know the FD Crockett could go so fast. And the Georgia E pulling them, you know. And so even with the 671 in it, Pretty would never run her hard. He took it easy on her. And with a Detroit diesel, you gotta run, you gotta open up down there because they'll carve up, they'll build up inside. They can't breathe, they can't run, you know. And they would have, guys would have to come in there and take sections of exhaust out and replace it because it'd be so carved up because he would not run her hard. So he took care of her. But I can tell you that, like I was telling y'all before, that him and William Bradshaw were the ones that kept her tip top, you know. And William could tell you some stories. William had been all through Baltimore and everything, and every morning, because I was crab dredging right there with them in Hampton Creek. We tied up to each other. We all helped each other. And so there would even be days when maybe we had some issue going on with our boat and we weren't going out, and they were short a person, then you'd get on there and go work with them for the day, you know? So we helped each other, we all worked with each other, and we were all around each other every day. So I knew them well. And, but when William be on there, William was his first mate. I mean, he was his right-hand man. And so we'd be dragging along and he'd say, William, go get me a cool, he would just say, cool, real loud, kind of long. Go get me a cool drink of water out the barrel, William. And William go, because he had the water barrel on the stern, he'd go get him a cool drink of water. And we'd tongue along, and he said, William, let's put a little more chain out. And so, you know, put more chain out. That makes the drudge more aggressive when you're out there working. And so I can tell you that everybody out there tried to follow Purdy to see how he was running, because he could catch a crab. He could find the crab and he was going to catch it. But what people don't realize is you're out there, when you're towing this way, you're running with the tide. When you turn around and come back, you're towing against the tide. You know, you might be in a situation where you're across the tide, but that's not what you want to do. But, you know, you're in different bottom, whether it's dirty or clean, how deep it is. I mean, there's so many variables that everybody would follow him and try to learn everything they could off of him. But it was up to him how much they learned, because he could decide how much chain he had out or how fast he was towing, or, you know, because it's constantly changing. You just got to know your situation, your environment, and how to address it. So, you know, a lot of people try to follow him all the time, but they only learn what he wanted them to learn. But I can tell you this, we would come down there in the morning and it would be foggy. You couldn't see the bow stem. You couldn't see the front of the boat standing on the boat. It was so thick, you couldn't see anything. You know, all the guys would go, man, you know, we ain't going nowhere today. Ain't nobody gonna do nothing today. And some of us were on houseboats where businesses owned the boats and hired people to run them. And that's what I was on. My dad was hired to run the Kingfish for Lawson Seaford. And we would get paid every day, when we showed up. If we showed up to work, we couldn't work, we'd still get paid for the day. So they're all happy. Oh man, we ain't going nowhere today. I said, you just hold on there, you just wait. And next thing you know, Purdy said, William, let's fire up. You know, and so then you hear the FD Crockett cranking up, buddy. And then everybody's like, oh no, really? You know, and so once he fired up, a bunch of us would fire up. There would be some that they weren't going nowhere. They stayed at that dock. But it'd be a whole line of us that would leave out of Hampton Creek, not even being able to see each other, and go out and cross that ship channel, go across that tunnel, and go down on Thimble Shoals, and be dredging crabs up and down Thimble Shoals all day long. And you can hear the ships. The ships are blowing their foghorn. They got radar. All we had was a VHF radio and a depth finder. That was it, and a compass. You had no radar, no bottom machines like you do now, none of that. And so we would work up and down that channel all day long, and you could hear them blow their foghorn. But we were close enough, you could hear the prop wash. I mean, you could hear them running, going right by you, and never even see them. And we would work all day long and go all the way back to Hampton Creek and never see a thing except that drudge bag coming over the side, solid full, and working that, because, you know, it was amazing. They were true captains. They knew the area, they knew the bottom, they knew where they were at, and could take you out there blindfolded. So, another thing is Purdy was not afraid to go out there and work either. If he could work, he was working. And so, we would be out there, you're on a deck boat, out in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, and when she would go down off a sea, and you look, there's a wall of water all the way around you, and you come up on this sea, and then you hit and the others. When you hit the next sea, it sprays over the bow, and you had a washdown hose so you could try to keep the ice. But we're out there in the wintertime, so we had the washdown hose where you try to keep the ice off. But it's so rough, and you're on a deck boat, and you didn't have time to mess with no water hose. And so it's spraying over, and everything is a sheet of ice. Everything just coated in ice. And you're down on your knees, sliding side to side, going over them seas, trying to cull the crabs, and then take a shovel and shovel everything overboard before the dredge come back up again. And so there were some rough times. But you know what? We loved every minute of it. It was a challenge, and we were all out there together working and just enjoyed it. It was one of the best fisheries we've had. Now, there's some will tell you it was the worst thing ever, but we loved it. And so, you know, just great memories. But I know I've been rambling on a little long, but I'll tell you this, that it was all, in the end, for Purdy himself, it was always said that he had worked over 50 years. But we know he was on it longer than that, but we're saying he ran that boat for 50 years before he got off of her. And I can tell you that she was very special to him. And in a sensitive way to say this, he had some struggles in his life, but that boat was there for him 24/7. And you would go down there late in the evenings, and he would still be sitting in that pilot house. And I mean, he spent his life on her. She was his life. And there were reasons for that, but I ain't gonna get into none of that. But she was there for him, and he was there for her. And she was that special to him. And that's why she was in such great shape, and he took such great care of her. And so then, you know, he ended up selling her to Faye Dryden, and then Faye Dryden sold her to David Westcott, and she went through a couple more hands. And she ended up, I was just saying, she ended up being sunk in a mud hole, you know, and she was in sad shape when you all got her. And so a wooden boat, they're great, but it only takes one owner to be the death of a wooden boat. I'm just going to say that because one owner can, you know, neglect them and they'll go away quick. And she was sad shape when you all got her. And so we're just so excited for the work that you all have done to bring her back to life, to keep her alive. And I mean, you didn't do it by yourself. You had your team up here showing us the team that's been working with you. And it takes the sponsors and everybody. You know, somebody's got to finance all of it and, you know, use them. And so she's in a great place. You know, and we know y'all will take care of her. So, you know, we want to say thank you, John and the team, for all that y'all have done. We want to say thank you to the Deltaville Maritime Museum and all that you've done. We want to say thank you to all the sponsors that have been supporting this. And we want to say, may she sail another 100 years as our heritage continues. And that's coming from the watermen and those that have been appreciating her, and some of us from Seaford. So,
That was pretty wonderful. Thank you so much, Alan.
Sure.
And I'm glad I know how to pronounce Seaford now.
It's not Seaford, it's Seaford.
Seaford. I've got my
No E in it.
compliments of Sandra Emerson. We want to take